right. Again, welcome everyone to our workshop on community city collaboration. If you could go ahead and rename yourself so we can see your name, what organization you're with. My name is Samantha. I am the community program manager here at Greenlink Analytics. And I'm going to be guiding us through with Angelica Chavez Duckworth, our Director of Community Initiatives, on this workshop on community city collaboration. So with that, we're going to dive in. So this is our agenda. Today, we're going to introduce and give some insights on how to use the process guide for city community collaboration. Some of you may have heard of this or used it before, but it's an awesome 43-page free resource for you to use. We'll talk about the who and why around this process guide, share insights about racial equity and racial justice as a part of foundations, and a graphic approach to get us thinking bigger picture before hearing about strategies and applications from Jelly and diving into breakout sessions. Then we'll have a Q&A about what we shared before diving into those breakout sessions. And in those sessions, they're going to be centered around topics that are thought-provoking conversation starters to give you space to share with each other and think about community city collaboration, share questions, insights, and facilitators are supporting with their expertise, as well as information from the process guide to these conversations. Also wanted to say there's going to be more space for these down the line. That second breakout room might just be more of a open space for us all to talk together. Okay. So what is our community of practice? This is a space where we connect leaders advancing environmental and social equity and learn about topics that improve our work through peer-to-peer conversations and data literacy. Who we are is next slide, please, Jolie. Oh, thank you. Greenlink Analytics took my screen a second. Working together to advance a clean energy transition as fast and fair as possible. We're a 501c3 based in Atlanta, and we work with cities and community-based organizations to make the world a better place. Next slide. GEM is our Greenlink equity map. It's a visualization tool created to make data easily accessible to everyone. Shows a lot of good data and intersectionality, and we have over 730 active members. It's used by over 60 cities and 93 community-based organizations. And then before diving in, I'd like you to take a look at this quote and let this sink in. Because we want to try and keep this in mind as we're going through this whole process and as we're thinking about what city community collaboration looks like. So you cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it, by Grace Lee Boggs. And then quick C, for those of you, next slide. For those of you who haven't seen it before, this is the process guide for city community collaboration. This is the cover. Again, it's a 43-page document, has a lot of infographics, questions, insights, and is designed to support cities and to make the best use of data created in tandem with our GEM, but it's for the city community collaboration on how do we start these conversations from both ends. With that, I'm going to dive into the who's and the whys. So now we have two who's that made this and who made this and who was it made for. So we have the authors of this guide, Rosa González. She's founder of Facilitating Powers, a consultancy designed to cultivate through deeper partnership the practice and pedagogy of a living democracy. She works with organizations, foundations, and collaborative initiatives to build the capacity for culturally rooted, community-driven leadership to advance whole system solutions. And Mina Tului is a racial equity consultant with a deep background in community engagement, climate justice, and city community relationship building. She works across sectors in the sustainability and climate universe, building forward towards a just planet for all so that we can all thrive together. We have the privilege of having her here today. She's going to be helping with some facilitation potentially, and I'm just excited to be talking about this. The other very important who is you all here today. So cities and communities. This is a process guide for city community collaboration. And why did we do this? We stated this in the intro of our guide, but over 100 cities across the United States have expressed the need for data-driven equity insights to inform climate and sustainability strategies. So in addition to good data to illuminate the intersection between climate strategy and racial equity, this collaboration is important. So with that, we're going to share insights from Rosa and talk more in depth on this. Rosa joined us on a previous community of practice. I'll share that in my follow up email next week. And she shared about racial equity and racial justice. Here, I wanted to highlight foundational points from her slide for you to look at as I'm speaking and say that the guide starts with insights from the field around what racial equity looks like and that it's a fundamental practice. So, keys are understanding inequities, why they exist, and what we can do to address them through targeted strategies that are designed for the communities who experience the most burden and impact through systematic and social injustices over time. Examples of this is redlining or housing gentrification. And to emphasize, don't shy away from naming race explicitly when talking about these most impacted or burdened communities. Also, I'd emphasize making sure you're using what names communities want to be called. Examples of this is learning about the histories of genocides of Indigenous people. If you're doing research and learning about the different communities' experiences, for example, what is the Long Walk, or a different, more commonly known death march, what is the Trail of Tears? And who or what are the names of the Indigenous communities that experience these different death marches? Where are they today? Is this a part of your background research? With the Trail of Tears, it's commonly known that this was the Cherokee that experienced this, but there's a lot of other communities that experience this. With the Long Walk, the Diné. So know them by their names and know and understand those complex things, because both cases, again, there were multiple communities marching hundreds of miles in terrible weather conditions. And knowing that there are multiple different communities experiencing different forced migrations or displacements from their homelands is important to distinguish and know which communities experienced what, to add to that historical conversation and reasoning for needing to rebuild trust here. So a last point here, I wanted to acknowledge the importance of this work for repairing harm caused by generations of institutional racism that has resulted in significantly worse life outcomes for communities. Thus, racial equity requires a comprehensive approach to social transformation by increasing and equitably sharing of power and resources. So, that understanding and acknowledgement of racial histories, creating shared visions, and building together to advance solution is that racial justice part. Now, really quickly, in the next slide, when you go through the guide more in depth later, again, it's meant to be a partner with data, and is how the guide is broken down into these four main phases of data sharing and analysis processing. So we have framing, preparation for collaborative data analysis, conducting collaborative data analysis, follow through for sustained action. And we recommend continuing to come back to this as you're going through the whole guide and before embarking on the steps outlined. Also, as mentioned, we use this guide in tandem with our previously mentioned GEM tool. So that shows the intersectional data. If you're interested in learning more about that, happy to follow up later. But with this framing, it begins to ask questions like, how can different perspectives of equity data help to identify genuine solutions to inequities? Ultimately, America's climate movement desperately needs better alignment and more effective collaboration between cities and communities impacted by inequities. And that's leading to my last slide, which this is a glance from an infographic from the process guide going into ecosystem approaches to regional racial equities. Looking at this, you will see that all groups present here are necessary to advance equitable changes and begin to ensure environmental justice for all. This is an ecosystem, just like water or air quality concerns. As oceans rise, we will all feel the impacts in different ways, from losing homes to economic and social impacts, as we live in a global society that's very interwoven. Just like an ecosystem in nature, if a well of water is poisoned, it affects all the living organisms that are a part of that ecosystem and continues on leaving both short and long-term effects. So we are all affected, each other and our networks. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jelly, but just keep this ecosystem in mind as we're going through this in our discussions later.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samantha. I appreciate that context building, which is really important, understanding why is this even important and why should we be advancing this as practitioners in the climate and equity space. What I'm going to focus on is taking that grounding context into the how. A lot of questions are okay. I understand this. I've seen this spectrum of community engagement, which is, if you're following along in the process guide, is also outlined in there, but it's been used all across the country from multiple different dynamics, whether institution or grassroots organization, to guides equitable community engagement that leads to ownership of the community and giving you strategies on how to actually build platforms that share power to community. So I'm going to focus in on some more of those activities and or strategies that are outlined here within the spectrum of community engagement to ownership. One of the first examples of this is community organizing. So you will see that on the spectrum of community engagement as a method to guide you towards building community power. And what this actually looks like is working with communities to understand the like the issues at hand through storytelling, listening, and understanding the values and concerns and priorities of community. And some strategies in organizing, include one-on-ones, having really deep conversations that are without an agenda in mind that enable relationship building with the community and build trust over time. And if we're thinking of this on a timeline, especially as you're working at the city and trying to implement an engagement process that is equitable, this relationship building should be the majority part of the engagement process, taking up a few months just to even get embedded in the community and truly understand what these are and to have true understanding in the priorities of the community and if they even want to continue engaging with you. As relationships are built over that time, then we get into identifying the key priorities of the community and understanding what some of the collective things we are hearing from these one-on-one conversations with embedded community members. And then we actually go into understanding the context and researching more of what has been done to already try to target these issues, right? This is a lot of time when our planning processes come in place, or research organizations like ourselves at Greenlink can come in and provide a little bit more structure and backbone and support for community stories, as well as continue to learn through peer learning processes that are going to get us towards mobilizing around solutions for these issues. And so this is just part of some of the strategies that go into community organizing and what this would actually look like in real time. And as you can see here, this is a wheel. And this wheel means that this process is continuous. It does not end. And that community is at the center of this process and should be reflected back to at every stage in this process. And so when we're thinking about creating platforms for community partnership and dispersing power to community at equal levels, making sure that they are included at every part of the process is important. Another thing I want to address is how do we actually know that we're doing a good job? Like, how do we know that we're succeeding at each of these different strategies? Here's an example of ways that community feedback, again, another measure that we put in place to know if we're actually moving along the spectrum towards creating platforms for community power. And it's really guiding our understanding of what transparency, relationships, belonging, and autonomy looks like with communities, whether we're an institution, governmental, or nonprofit, in our relationship to the community. So you'll notice here that this is the actual feeling and responses that happen as we are building relationship and moving along the spectrum if we are actually creating those spaces where community feels like they have a way to genuinely contribute to the issues that they have raised. And so transparency is letting the community know not only like what we want, that we want to help them, but also being very clear of our role as an institution of what we can and cannot do. A barrier that often comes up with city collaboration is that the city is not able to identify their role clearly enough and unfortunately sometimes positions themselves to make promises that they're unable to keep with the community. And that just completely, takes away all the trust building that you have done before. So that transparency up in the beginning is, here's what I can and cannot do in the time that I have. And the response to that is community having true understanding of that full transparency and still wanting your help. As we build relationships, the relationships is also reflected as a meaning of support from your organization, the way that the institution continues to show up, and how the community actually feels supported in those manners that you do. And as you continue to build relationships, we get into spaces where communities actually feel connected and like they actually can contribute and that they have a place to contribute, and that they actually feel like they are belonging to the process itself. The last note I will make here is that when we're moving all the way across that spectrum, when we're getting to deferring to community or community ownership and autonomy is really making sure that we're setting community up as we're giving them a platform to have the resources they need to continue to be successful, whether you are present and you are not. So there's a lot of ecosystem building that goes into this that we're not able to get into today, but that Samantha showed early on around equity and environmental ecosystem building that supports these processes. But when we're thinking about how do we know and be successful and how do I get there, there are feedback mechanisms we put in place to let us know if we are actually creating safe places for communities to exercise their power. And with that, we're going to take a quick break to answer any questions or reflections from the audience that we have right now. And feel free to come off mute or raise your hand or put things in the chat as well.
I'll jump in. Thanks for this. My name is Heather. I'm with the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and something I'm thinking about a lot is how to be transparent with communities, even if we don't necessarily know the extent to which we're going to be able to continue to show up, or like the fullness of what we'll be able to provide, dependent upon like the grant ecosystem and all these other factors that we don't necessarily have full influence over. And so yeah, any thoughts on how to hold that balance would be appreciated.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. And if my team has any other additions, please feel free to chime in here. But I think that actually the answer is in your question, is that if there is any uncertainty of like your control of an outcome, the ability to communicate that to community is one of the best ways to be transparent. Here's, as an institution, these are the restrictions that I have with grant funding. This is the timeline I have to do it. These is how quick I have to turn in these timelines. These are the constraints that I am under. And a lot of times what that does is that doesn't always just halt the community from participating, but it gives them spaces to think of, well, then how do we build capacity and how do we move in a way that is going to enable us to continue rather than stop when the deadline ends. So if there's any level of uncertainty, I know that is difficult, but a lot of times being able to communicate that uncertainty is a lot more helpful than to just to make promises or to leave community hanging. And I see Mina wants to add to that as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like, it sounds so simple, but like using your words and just saying exactly what you just said, like, here are the constraints that that we're facing. At the same time, often folks will feel like, they can share the constraints very easily and be like, I don't have power to do much else besides this. And like, that's kind of where the focus is. But we sometimes forget to share, where we do have influence and power in our position, whether it's in an organization or an intermediary or in a local government. Like, we do have quite a bit of power. And so it's important to say, I can't help you with your water bill, even though that's a legit question that you brought here. But here's what I can do is I can find you a contact of someone who can help you, or, we can't give money beyond the grant cycle, but we can put you in touch with such and such and such. So part of what we go into in the guide is also about like that sort of advocacy role, which is kind of a spicy word. But there are different roles to be advocates for the community, even if it's not kind of like formally a part of the project that you might be doing together.
Yes. Well, one more thing I just wanted to add on that because I thought of this as we go. And again, we don't have a lot of space to get into a lot of this detail, but I think like what Mina is saying is the clarity of roles and also the clarity of what we mean by capacity. Like when we're in the social movements, like we're always hearing capacity building, but being very clear that there's so many different types of capacity. There's personnel capacity, there's relational capacity, there's financial capacity, there's intellectual capacity. And so being able to clearly define this is what literally the type of capacities that I have alongside these constraints. And so I think that's also a big thing when it comes to city governments, but also the planning departments that are oftentimes moving the climate plans forward or these initiatives forward and are trying to communicate that to community. So hopefully that was helpful for you, Heather.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. Appreciate the different perspectives on it.
And I noticed Samantha had put some other things in the chat that I think are very valuable as well, like being very transparent about the process that you are using. And yes, of course, building networks, connecting, being the connector, even if like you're not able to solve the problem yourself. Any other questions, reflections, or things we're thinking through from this crowd?
I want to emphasize, if you're like me, a crock pot, you take a while to simmer with this information. As I said earlier, there'll be more opportunities for discussion. We're always available. And in our breakout rooms, it's a space where you're going to have a topic, but it's really to dive into discussions and share what we do, what we don't know in a safe and brave space together. Because that's a part of that network and ecosystem building and collaboration is sharing what we are aware of, what we aren't aware of, and learning from each other.
That in mind, any brave souls? We good? Okay. If we think of things again, please use the chat as a tool. We are here to capture all of your thoughts and reflections, and we want to learn from you too, because we know that the process guide is a practice. Engagement is a practice that is continuous and constantly iterative. So if you have examples of how you've seen this work or strategies that you have put forward that have been that you would consider best practice, please feel free to share your knowledge in this space as well. But with that, I think it's fair. We'll move on to breakout, Sammy.
Yeah. So as we said, before going into breakouts, I want you to get a chance to read this, and we will go into 2 breakout rooms, and we're going to share this in the chat as well. But so as we're discussing, apply what you have learned to discuss challenges and ideas for solutions. That's what you've learned today with us and what you're bringing from your previous knowledge and set of skills and experiences. So this is the topic for this breakout room. And again, let your discussions be fluid, but we're centering it around this because we know a lot of cities and community-based organizations have voiced creating these climate action plans. So and here's the topic. Increase the effectiveness of climate action plan by understanding which communities are disproportionately impacted, in what ways, and to recognize the kinds of solutions that won't cause or exacerbate disproportionate impacts. And so with that, I'm going to send us off into breakout rooms, and we'll start these conversations.
All right, give me a minute to share my screen again, but we are going to be going into a debrief session. So Samantha, if you want to get that started while I pull this up, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you all. These conversations are always so great, and I feel they're always cut off short. But I wanted to open the room to see if anyone from our breakout room wanted to share anything that they heard or maybe didn't get to share before I say anything. And you can go ahead and take yourself off mute if you'd like to. See the chat here going on. Okay, I see Philip said I could convey his comments. Okay. So Philip was in our breakout room, and we talked about superpowers as our icebreaker, and then we went into this discussion. Have a lot of flyers in the room, teleportation, time, and reading people's minds. And I thought those were all really good insights to these conversations as well. But we talked about data and how it sometimes the numbers feel tone deaf, and talked about tying that to the stories. Philip shared that and emphasized, going off what we were talking about with ecosystems, that you need to really, like, you're building these relationships. So it's like coffees, lunches, they're real relationships, because this is a community where we're making changes together, and those community members are giving really great insights to the data, to the information. They're the ones sharing and building off of it. Anyone else from our breakout room want to add to what we were talking about? Okay. And then, yeah, Jelly, do you want to share some from yours? I'm still simmering with like some of the questions that were asked and whatnot as well.
Yes, I'll let you crock pot. So I'm gonna pick on a couple of my team or my colleagues here that I got to talk with, because I thought there was some really good conversation, and we got to go in depth around some strategies for real life work that we are doing. But a lot of questions came up on like how we engage in particular communities and what types of resources we need to do that effectively and equitably. And so I don't know if Caleb wants to share anything that he learned from our collaborative conversation with our people in our room. That'd be great.
Yeah. Sorry. I use they them pronouns. What was I thinking? Okay. So one thing that we sort of brainstormed in our working group, what our breakout group, was how to address community action planning from a standpoint of disability justice, particularly for low vision people, because We Act has created like a whole mapped out sort of vision plan of flood vulnerable areas and places to access information in the event of flooding, as well as sort of a trifold that explains how to prevent and address heat stress. But we don't have something that is not so reliant on vision. So we had talked about sort of co-creating assets that are video or audio media, as well as sort of working to not reinvent the wheel, and working with community groups that either are very engaged in tenant organizing, or disability access, to bring community in at the early stage to help co-design what like that sort of focus on in the CREP, our Climate Ready Uptown Plan program, might look like. And again, building in, like incorporating that ecosystem view of like, what would that mean for property owners that have basement dwellings to be engaged in that conversation as well, even knowing that basement apartments are illegal in New York City. So just kind of trying to work through those nuances. Sorry, that was long.
No, that was fantastic. And I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I don't think I could have articulated as well as you. So, I mean, those are real life strategies to work towards. And I hope that that's something you can take away into your work, and look forward to like following up on seeing how that goes. We also kind of got into over in West Virginia, Heather got to talk about how like they've been doing a lot of listening sessions, and they've been hearing a lot of different things coming up within these listening sessions. And as we do listen to community, we're hearing all these concerns. Like, how do we hold all of those concerns with like equal weight while also prioritizing the things that we need or can't even act on. So again, not to put my team on the spot, but I think that they can articulate it better. Heather, would you like to share anything that you learned from like collaborating with some of our groups that we talked about?
Yeah, well, it was kind of like what we got to talk about earlier, but just in the sense of like this is a question that I'm wrestling with and my colleagues too on a regional scale even. And the question should be taken back to the community, right? Like how do we hold all of these truths and making sure that um, the folks that we serve are the ones that are prioritizing what the solutions are. And so I think for me, it's kind of difficult because I'm like, wow, I get paid to think about all this. And it's like so much to think about all the time. And I struggle sometimes with like, I don't want to place the burden to come up with solutions on people that are already overburdened. And so what I'm kind of taking away from this conversation is that there is ways to like tap into community strength to guide our work that might be simpler than I'm making it out to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's wonderful. And I think you bring up a really good point, especially when we think about like processes and iteration, that I'm glad that this is bringing up more questions for you all and that these questions are guiding some of your work. So I do kind of want to follow up with the rest of the crew here. Like what other questions are we wrestling with within our work as it relates to collaborating with communities in a fair and equitable way?
And as Jelly likes to remind the simmering crock pot, you can share if you have some free flow thoughts coming to mind. This is a space of learning, so feel okay to share if you're comfortable.
Anything from the Greenlink team? I know we have some people here. Any questions that we deal with when we're working on city community collaboration that may be helpful or maybe lessons learned?
I think I know a question I've heard a lot, especially lately, but like going back to like fundamentals, why engage and collaborate with cities and communities? Like from the city side, why? From the community-based organization side, why? And what would be your ideals be in looking at that? And what are some of the barriers to that? Knowing like your own work streams or as you're doing your research, knowing and learning about the other side. I also see in the chat, Tia Ferguson shared flexibility, pivoting from unforeseen challenges. That's really good insights. Appreciate you sharing.
Just to clarify, Tia, was that like more like you're still trying to figure that out and like marinating on like how do we do that? Or do you have some like, good examples of how that has been done? I'm sorry, we can't hear you. I think you're still muted.
I apologize. Thank you for that question. So I'm on week 4, and one of the things that I'm learning and getting to learn about the community is that there has, for instance, we're doing weatherization into the homes. And one of the unforeseen challenges was that these are generational homes. So that have been passed down from one family member to another. So you have multiple people that are on the deeds. And so that was unforeseen as far as legally what can be done to make sure that the work is able to go forward. So that is what I mean by like unforeseen challenges. Especially when you're dealing with older populations, they might not be as aware and as comfortable with the whole entire idea of how climate justice relates to their lives personally. So that's what I mean by that.
I have a question. Are you finding ways to work around those complications around deeds? Like, or is it so far just like one of those question marks that's out there?
We are considering bringing in an individual from the Franklin County Auditor Office to see what can be done. If it's as simple as a notarized statement where the individual that lives out of town could just okay the work being done for the family member that actually lives in the home.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that, because I imagine that is an issue that a lot of people like run into. Not that one in particular, but just like
Mhm.
how when do we know when we need to move around things? And sometimes we have a plan in mind, and then we are hit with a blockage or like this is going to change everything. And sounds like also like from a time perspective, this is going to add more time to getting these homes like weatherized. Yeah, I'm curious, any other thoughts from this group around any other maybe strategies or things to think through that may help Tia before we close out? Okay. Well, I hope that this was very engaging for you all. We definitely have time and space to continue networking and learning from each other and to follow up on your initiatives to see how we can be helpful. But as always, the process guide is a resource for you, and there's a number of strategies in there that help outline some of these. So if you would like more information about that, you can go and download the process guide right now, and you can see that. And also feel free to reach out to our team, and we can help guide you through that as needed as well. So please use it as a resource. It is free, it is a tool, and it is helpful in the sense of a lot of the things that we are doing as it relates to advancing climate and racial justice. So as we are closing out here, I'm going to pass it back to Samantha and share my screen again and just thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. I want to echo what Jelly said, and thank you all for being here and a part of the conversation and asking questions and sharing about your work streams. It's really appreciated, and I look forward to hopefully having more conversations and being in the space with you. So again, this quote, I said at the beginning to keep it in mind. I just wanted to end with this quote as well to remind us all, like in our conversations, we were bringing this forward and talking to this, but you cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. So, oh, I see that if you came on late, you get to see it. But keep this in mind as you're going through your work streams about how you're a part of this ecosystem and what you're doing, and think about the short, the long term, and the communities and the cities in different approaches. So wanted to end with that before going to our final slide. That's a thank you to all of our partners, especially Upright Consulting and Facilitating Powers, Verde Partnership of Southern Equity for helping us put this together, and Mina for being here today with us, T-Tech and our network and leadership committees. Also, if you want to connect with us, these are our emails. Please always feel free to reach out to us, and I'll be following up with an email that will have the slides, the recording parts of the workshop here today, as well as just some other resources just to connect you and link you to that. And always feel free to reply to the emails I send to continue these conversation with us, because we do want to keep building and learning together with you. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Okay, thank you all. Take care.